So, Battle of the Sexes this week was pretty much all about the women. And yes, maybe I might have been anti-women a little bit or pro-women a little bit, but it was very, very much about the women. But this time, I'm gonna try and make it about the dudes. And I'm not going to be bashing them, so if you think that's what I'm gonna do, then sorry. But I will be trying to explain stuff that dudes go through in a very dude-like way. So, kind of more or less how the podcast is. But before I get into that, I want to address something that affects both genders, at least in one part of the world. Now, Indonesia has banned sex outside of marriage and banned unmarried couples from living together. Those caught and convicted could face up to a year in jail. Now, to think about it for a little bit, it's a little bit of a tricky situation, not just on like the implementation side of it, but when you actually think about what it is that they're trying to do. Because in as much as they're trying to prevent sex outside of marriage, it's like they're literally just switching players. Because you kind of think about it, you are having sex with your girlfriend and then you get caught, you get thrown into prison, then you end up having sex with your boyfriend or your bunkmate or some shit. Like, at the end of it, you're pretty much putting people in more or less the same exact position, just them not being put in the same exact positions that they'd want to be in. Get what I'm saying? Because you kind of think about it, if I'm busy having a thing with my girlfriend and then I get taken and thrown into a men's prison, I might end up, being in the wrong position for another dude, such as being bent over, something I'm not particularly open to. And that's also unwanted sex, or should I say unmarried sex, which also doesn't really help the case at all. Not unless if they're throwing these guys into prisons or into jail cells, which pretty much have one person per occupancy, not bunk beds like most other typical prisons kind of have. And at least in my case, it's unwanted. Now think about people who are part of the LGBT. A gay guy is taken from being shagged by his dude, that's his boyfriend. He's being taken to jail and he's being shagged by a different dude. Like, it's even worse for him because in some cases he might actually like it. Although, let me just try and read the story from the BBC News. So, Indonesia's parliament has approved... I'm using the BBC, so proper English. Indonesia's parliament has approved a new criminal code that bans anyone in the country from having sex outside marriage, including foreigners. Under the new laws, unmarried couples can be jailed for up to a year for having sex. They are also banned from living together, and people could be jailed for up to 6 months for breaking this law. The new laws won't come into effect for another 3 years, and it's expected that there will be court challenges. Rights groups say that this disproportionately affects women, LGBT people, and ethnic minorities in the country. End of story. Now, let me just think about this for a second. The way these guys are saying that this disproportionately affects women, I don't get how that works, not unless if you're talking about the LGBT. More so lesbians, one lesbian out in the real world, one lesbian in prison, Although I feel like the bigger argument that hasn't been had yet is how exactly these guys are supposed to bring this up for appeal. Because imagine you going to try and appeal and you're one of those kids that's been raised in a proper religious home and you're like, people should be allowed to have sex with whom they want, when they want, in the comfort of a home where they feel like they can be comfortable together. And then your parents just look at you while they're sitting and they're like, did we raise this one right? Like, imagine trying to justify premarital sex, especially to a bunch of lawmakers that are old. Like, this feels like an uphill battle in and of itself. So honestly, whoever it is that's going to bring this up within the coming 3 years, good for you. Either way, I know if I'm in that country, I might end up being convicted for talking about it because I can be a little bit loud and some of the stuff that I say can make a woman make some pleasurable noises. Kind of like me saying, welcome to Breaktime on Westside, your number one Breaktime podcast, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. The man on the mic is a man who clearly does not understand how someone's going to appeal this case. Like, good luck to you. I cannot think of any good defense in this. He's a man whose sickness for the thickness prevents him from skinny dipping. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. The show is Tweetstreet, the show where we take a deep dive into Twitter, pull up a couple of tweets, and break them down a little bit. Now, as usual, if you know the drill, then you can repeat it after me. If you don't know the drill, it's okay. And if you feel like you know the drill, then is fine, because I'm gonna repeat it for you, is how you can contribute to the making of these episodes. Even though this is the last episode of the series, you can still send the content there, and it is a very simple drill. It sounds like a song, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @Bagaka the D, which happens to be my personal Twitter handle, and I will take it from there and I will handle it. On Facebook, on IG, you can send it to the DMs of @Breaktime on my side. The DMs are always open there as well. If it happens to be a screenshot or a screen grab that was taken from Twitter and ended up on any one of those two platforms. Now, a massive thank you to each and every one of you that's been a part of this podcast, that's been a part of the listening experience of this podcast over this entire season. Don't worry, Raw Zone continues, which is a much shortened version, allows me to sort of take a break, enjoy the festivities and all, and I will be back in January. January the 6th is the date to mark if you are looking forward to the next episode of Tweetstreet. But all that said and done, we do have a bunch of tweets that we probably should get into. But before we do that, we need to go to Rwanda for a little bit. Now, around mid-November, there was a story that came up from Rwanda which actually baffled quite a number of Kenyans, more so Kenyan women. Now, it was a story on the recent statistic done by Rwanda's Minister of Gender and Family Promotion, where it was said that 65% of Rwandese women are okay with being beaten by their men. Now, this ended up dominating a bunch of headlines online, and people were busy coming out or like, I'm glad I'm Kenyan. How is it that such beautiful women are allowing themselves to get whooped? Blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, I feel like people ended up reacting just out of emotion the moment they saw that, as opposed to actually looking into the entire thing. Now, I got the story not from IG but from the news article, and let me just read it for you. Rwanda's Minister of Gender and Family Promotion, Jeanette Bayisenge, has revealed that the fight against gender-based violence in the country is far from being tamed. While responding to questions about family conflicts and problems affecting society before Parliament on Tuesday, Bayisenge attributed her sentiments to the Demographic and Health Survey of 2020 on women's and men's attitudes towards wife beating. The survey shows that 65% of surveyed women said wife beating was justified under certain circumstances. About 18% said a wife should be beaten when she has not cooked well, and 31% of the women said the wife can be beaten if she has an argument with her husband. Meanwhile, 2% of the surveyed men agreed a wife should be beaten when she has not cooked well, while 6% said a wife should be beaten if she argues with her husband. Another 61% of women said that it was justifiable to beat a wife if she cheated on her husband, while 36% of men agreed. The minister raised concerns that the rate is alarming and poses a clear indication the nation has a great deal of work to do to floor the numbers. She further added that the country needs to employ more strategies to overturn the appalling mindset of citizens. End of article. Now, the interesting thing is, people were mostly reacting to the IG posts and the stuff that was being posted up on Twitter, and most of the Kenyan babes were busy losing it, and they were like, for me as a Kenyan, if they tried that shit here, we'd throw hands, as a Kenyan woman, blah, 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 I'm glad I don't live there, I'm glad that I don't go through this shit, how can such beautiful women accept that kind of BS? And the thing is, I feel like too many people missed the point, and everyone was just reacting to the idea of 65% of Rwandese women being beaten, which is actually not the case. If you read the report itself, if you read the title itself properly, then you would understand that they are okay with being beaten, not that they are being beaten. If you actually look at the stats with the guys, it's actually been said 2% of the surveyed men agreed a wife should be beaten when she has not cooked well. 6% said a wife should be beaten if she argues with her husband. You look at the infidelity ones, where 61% of women said that it was justifiable to beat a wife if she cheated. It was actually 36% of men that agreed with that. Now, the thing is, I feel like too many people were so engrossed to the whole idea of 65% of Rwandese women are okay with being beaten, not if they actually are being beaten. Like, people are thinking about the potential and they're thinking, oh my goodness, it's so bad, as opposed to whether it's actually happening. To be completely honest, I don't know if they are being beaten per se, but the fact that a massive majority of them are okay with it does spell a couple of things, because they can clearly see that under certain circumstances it makes sense as a punishment. Now, by all means, it doesn't mean that it's justifiably true by most cultures and by most people, and that's perfectly okay, but it's something they're okay with. Now, you look at the men, a lot of them are clearly not of the idea that they should actually be beating their wives. And I guess that's a pretty good sign. The problem is, no one's ready to bring that out in an entire story. Even the IG post where I originally saw this story did not bring out the part where there's a very, very tiny percentage of men, a very marginal percentage of men that were like, you know what, it's okay and she should be beaten if she hasn't cooked well, or if she argues with her husband, or if she cheats. It's not even more than a third of the people that were surveyed. So to think about it, like, I feel like people were just getting scared and losing their shits for absolutely no reason at all, because at the end of the day, it's just them saying that they're okay with it, not that it's actually going to happen. It's like you having a car that can do 0 to 100 in 2.5 seconds. Does it mean that you'll be doing that every single time? No. Does it mean that you will even be comfortable doing that every single time? No. Maybe you just wanted the car because it looked beautiful. Hell, maybe you wanted the car because you just liked how it rode, not about how hard it would accelerate if you put your foot down and you let go of the brake from the line. And at the end of the day, it sort of just shows you how a lot of people like to focus on the negative side of things without actually looking at the true story itself. In as much as it said yes, 65% of Rwandese women are okay with being beaten by their men, it has said nothing to whether they are actually being beaten by their men. Maybe it just comes from a cultural upbringing whereby the culture was very permissive and perfectly okay with a man beating his woman under certain circumstances. But either way, it's not unlike women to jump to conclusions after seeing some shit, so I'm gonna leave it at that because I have tweets to handle, and I will move it on. So on to our very first tweet of this episode. Handsome privilege is indeed a thing, and if you haven't experienced it, well, women cook, clean, buy gifts, make reservations, etc. for men they find attractive. If you haven't experienced it, it's because you're lacking in the gene pool, beloved. And honestly, as sad as it is, even the broke ones still benefit from it. You know how many fine broke ass men be having their way with women? It's really unfortunate. Okay, so the way she sort of put it, it's not untrue. It's actually a very true thing. It's actually a real phenomenon that happens. And yes, guys have benefited because of some level of handsome privilege. It's just that in as much as I'd really like to get into all of this, I feel like the first thing I need to start by saying is that it's just pretty privilege, but for guys. Like, the way she's saying handsome privilege like it's something that's absolutely new or an unknown phenomenon, it's actually not. Like, I've spoken about pretty privilege, and I've spoken about how it doesn't just favor women, it favors men as well. It's statistically proven. It's like the most discriminating factor even before race, because more attractive people can actually move up the corporate ladder. They can get more shit that they want as opposed to less conventionally attractive ones. Like, I don't see why it seems like it's such a new thing to this person. But yes, all in all, yes, handsome privilege or pretty privilege, whatever it is you want to call it, does exist, and it does afford guys quite a number of benefits. There's some guys who are bums, but they've been kept by babes who are hardworking and make good money simply because they deliver good pipe and they look incredibly good. There's guys that have managed to get promoted because the person that's above them, whether male or female, straight or gay, finds favor with them because they've noticed them more because they are just more attractive than their relative peers in that particular department. Like, it's something that isn't even a case of you being particularly attracted to the person. It's just a case of those people just being genuinely attractive. Like, it's something that actually does sort of happen quite a bit, and it's something that doesn't just affect relationships, although in the relationships front, it's disproportionately bigger, because when you look at a guy that is incredibly good looking, when it comes to approaching women, not only is his chances of getting a babe a lot more, but babes are naturally just drawn towards him because on one end, the guy looks like he has good genetics because, he's attractive. So of course a babe would want to have that. Because from an evolutionary psychology point of view, the fact that he's more attractive means that he has good genetics by design. So the guy is probably taller, so he's probably going to give tall kids, and they'll probably be stronger. Not just necessarily the fact that they'll be better looking, but from a physiological standpoint, they seem to have pretty good genetics. Then you think about the amount of allowance that a babe is going to give a good looking guy versus a not so good looking guy, and you start to see where those differences even grow a lot more. Because when you look at, say, me approaching a random babe versus a guy who's, say, 5'6" approaching the same woman. Now, for me, because I'm around 6'2", 6'3", my chances actually increase a little bit more. Actually, quite a hell of a bit more if this babe is even around 5'6", because when a guy approaches her, he's automatically going to be looked at as short. Now, on top of that, I'm allowed to actually, transcend the whole bubble that every single person has, because more people want an attractive person close to them. So I can afford to be a lot touchy. I can afford to say things that some people might find a little bit offensive if you're just flirting for the first time, so I can be a little bit more sexual and it'll fly, as opposed to some other guys. They can try the same tactics and it won't really work with them because they don't classify as attractive to a degree. So this whole handsome privilege thing, it's not rocket science. It's actually something that us guys have known about for a very long time. We just either called it pretty privilege, or we just knew that there was a guy that could pull way more babes than the rest of us. So that said and done, I will leave it at that and move it on. So on to our very next tweet of this episode. So men actually masturbate before sex just to last longer. Okay, so considering that this babe doesn't know this, or she's just finding this out, it would mean that, y'all actually do think that most guys that actually last long can last long because they're actually capable of doing that. There's quite a number of guys that'll go, beat their meat a quick few seconds or a quick few minutes, or even just maybe an hour or two before they go meet with a babe, because they just don't want to be judged harshly. Because most guys are judged based on their first nut, not based off of how long they last in bed beyond that. Because the thing is, one of the biggest problems for guys when it comes to sex is how long they last, because us guys are judged on that shit, on top of the other thing that we're judged on, which is the length of our dicks. Now, of course, we want to go in and want to perform well and want to do a good job, but sometimes us guys haven't had pussy in a long time, or sometimes us guys just let it go too quickly. Probably we have the feels for the babe, probably we were incredibly aroused beforehand, and we pretty much put it in and, job was done right after it started. There's guys that have nutted in like under 10 strokes, and there's others who've even nutted in under 10 seconds. The truth is, that first nut isn't supposed to mean all that much. Because when it comes to sex, the fact that we can nut quickly actually speaks to how good you are or how aroused we are. The real talk of whether we can last long is the other rounds that we take after it. More so the second and the third round, if someone can go to the third round. Because you find that a lot more guys will last a hell of a lot longer in that second or third round, which can come down to things like post-nut clarity, or whether we were genuinely interested, or just basic shit like how aroused we are, because our level of arousal will determine how long we will take to nut as guys. Simple. So all in all, yes, a lot of guys will masturbate before they have sex, and most times we try to keep that shit hidden just so that you don't start judging us for that shit as well. But for what it's worth, it's for your sake, not just mine. Like, I'd have been happy with my first nut and that's it, but we want to give you pleasure as well, so you might as well get that first nut out of the way, and then we can give you that second and that third while you enjoy your first few. So all that said and done, I will leave it at that, and I will move it on to our, is it the last one? I don't know, depends on how much space we have after that. Next tweet of this episode. If you want to be considered as a wife, wouldn't it make logical sense to lead off with your wife qualities instead of your education and degrees? Hashtag Future Wives Club. The interesting thing is, when I was busy getting this post on IG, there was another post that was right next to it, which was, and I quote, Why are women finding it more and more difficult nowadays to find a man that will marry them? Like, it feels like an answer to this question that's out here, because you kind of think about it, it would actually make a lot more sense if you led off with your wife qualities instead of trying to prove that you're a bad bitch to me. Like, that makes sense. Or when you try to show me your work experience and degrees. Like, babes usually talk about this thing of, oh, you know, it's a date, not a CV, so I don't see why you need to ask, blah, blah, blah. But you guys end up talking about the stuff that you do and who you are as a person, and most of that shit is stuff that would fit in a CV. So maybe if a lot of the babes led off with more wifey type qualities, then probably that would work. Like, you know, her ability to cook and clean and shit. More so cooking, because, you know, food is important and everything. Although that does kind of track back to that original question that I'd brought up. And I actually did kind of think about this question a little bit. And on one end, there's guys that are just genuinely afraid of marriage. But in the large chunk of men that are open to the idea of marriage or some form of a long-term partnership, I feel like the problems are more or less the same on both ends, because I really tried thinking about what the issue is, and I brought it down to its simplest form in two things, and that is options and shit. And yes, I know it sounds very weird, but let me try and explain. So we have a group of women that feel like there's too many options in guys, and it's even made worse by the fact that you can literally swipe left or right to choose which guy you want on Tinder or Bumble or Hinge, and that kind of makes it hard for people to choose one and settle down, because you like the qualities of one, but you've been with another guy that has certain qualities that you like. And I don't want to bring in the whole them banging multiple dudes before they get married, but it is something to be considered. So at the end of the day, you have all of these options, but you're not really centering on one, because there's so many qualities that one guy has that you like, but another guy also has that you also like. So that whole paradox of choice kind of becomes a bit of an issue for quite a number of women. Then when you look at it, more so even from the guy's side, it's the whole idea that there's less in terms of options. So there's not that many great guys out there. And something that I've heard a lot of women saying is all the great guys are either taken or gay. And that's been a very interesting thought process. And you know, you can blame it on the fact that she has shit choosing choices, or maybe she's the problem. But that's something that a lot of babes believe, that there's very, very little options in the name of actual great guys to be with. And sometimes they might end up all running for the same kinds of dudes. Although that's irrelevant to this case. But when you look at it from the guy side as well, guys also think that there's way less options in the name of babes, because now they're like, oh, you know, babes out here nowadays are hoes, blah, blah, blah. They're not loyal, or they'll take half your shit, which reinforces the whole fear of marriage. And thus we have two genders that pretty much should be together, that is pretty much looking at each other saying, you know what, there's not enough good in you that I'd actually want to commit to. Then you look at the shit part, you know, both genders have a problem with the other gender's shit. And it's sort of packaged in different ways for different genders. So with babes, they're like, oh, you know, we've taken so much shit from guys over the years. Oh, you know, my mom took so much shit from my dad, or my aunt took so much shit from my uncle, or I've watched my grandmother go through shit and I don't want to go through that because of a man. And as a result, they end up pushing a bunch of guys away, because, you know, they see 1 ounce of something they don't like and they're automatically out. Then you look on the guy's side, and guys aren't more so talking about the kind of shit they're taking. For them, they're like, you know what, these babes aren't worth the shit that they speak so much about. Because, you know, you're getting a babe and you realize she can't cook, or she's not submissive enough, or she doesn't respect you, or she's all about being a bad bitch, or she only wants a soft life and she doesn't want to provide any input. And they're like, you know what, this babe, no matter how fine she is, no matter how sweet she sounds, she's not worth her shit, so I don't want her. And at the end of the day, you know, there's a zero compromise level on both ends. And because no one's willing to compromise, because no one's willing to, you know, move in a different manner and be like, you know what, I'm willing to take this, but I'm not willing to take that, you end up with an entire generation of people that are having trouble actually settling down. So to answer the question that was asked earlier, it just comes down to those two things, opinions and shit. Although then again, when I think about it, my opinions might be shit, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open On Twitter, it is at Bagaka the D. On Facebook, on IG, it is at Breaktime on Westside. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end of this episode and of this season. And I will catch you guys on the next break.